After starting off as an agent, Joe was assigned to the FBI laboratory where he worked extensively on DNA research. And in fact, he successfully introduced, I hope I get this right, mitochondria DNA to forensic casework. Joe was assigned many different roles during that period before he was appointed Assistant Director for FBI Laboratory Division. And in that position, he led more than 650 FBI laboratory personnel providing forensic support and examinations, expert witness testimony, training to federal, state, local, and international law enforcement. So if you would, join me in welcoming Joe and our panelists today on this topic.
Well, thank you, James. It's an honor and pleasure to be here with you this afternoon, and I think I can speak for the entire panel when I can say we fully recognize that we are the only thing that stands between you and dinner, so we thank you for your perseverance in remaining here with us this afternoon. We have an excellent panel. Our panel consists of Dr. Thomas Killion, the Director of the Biometrics Identity Management Agency at DoD, Mr. Robert Mocny, Director of the US VISIT Program at DHS, Mr. Dan Roberts, the Assistant Director of the Criminal Justice Information Systems Division at the FBI, and Ms. Stephanie Rowe, Founder and CEO of Rowe-NEXT LLC. Well, in our hour and 15 minutes here today, this afternoon, we certainly cannot cover the wide range of identity management topics. Therefore, we've chosen to focus today on the technical, legal, and policy issues associated with identity management and interoperability in the government workspace. To this audience of IT professionals, the technical issues associated with sharing biometric data are often quite easy to resolve. The less obvious and oftentimes more difficult issues confronted by each and every one of our panelists every day are the legal and policy issues that delay or prevent the interoperability of biometric systems. Our goal today is for you to have a greater appreciation of the wide range of biometric data interoperability issues confronted by the government. And most importantly, we sincerely hope that you will fully appreciate how important it is for the IT industry to become intimately familiar with our customers so that we can fully understand all of the technical, legal, and policy issues that may be unique to each government customer so that we can best assist them in accomplishing their critical missions. So with that, let me first introduce our first speaker, Dr. Thomas Killion. Dr. Killion became the Director of the Biometric Identity Management Agency, or BIMA, in October 2010. As the BIMA Director, Dr. Killion executes the Secretary of the Army's responsibilities for DoD biometrics, where he leads DoD activities to coordinate, integrate, and synchronize biometric technologies and capabilities, and operate and maintain DoD biometric databases. Prior to joining BIMA, Dr. Killion was detailed to the Joint IED Defeat Organization, or JIATO, as a science advisor to the director, where he provided scientific and technical advice and developed an S&T strategy and roadmap for JIATO. Among his other assignments, Dr. Killion has also served as the Deputy Assistant Secretary of the Army for Research and Technology and Chief Scientist. In this position, he was responsible for the entire Army Research and Technology program, spanning 21 laboratories with more than 10,000 scientists and a 6-year budget of more than $11 billion. Dr. Killion is a recipient of numerous awards, including the Meritorious Presidential Rank Award and the Exceptional Civilian Service Award for the Department of the Army. Please welcome Dr. Thomas Killion.
That'd be good. Well, as he said, I'm the new guy on this panel since I've been in place for all of about 3.5 months. And so any really tough questions, I'm handing off to Bob or to Dan, something like that. They'll help me out with this. I welcome the opportunity to come today to talk a bit about what we do in BIMA and what we do within the DoD in terms of using biometrics as a tool to support our warfighters and to accomplish our missions. And the process we use is really gathering data, multiple modalities of data, from the field through a variety of systems, processing them through what's called ABIS, it's our authoritative database, and looking to match that, whether there's latent prints, whether we have iris data, face data from somebody in the field, to try to determine whether we're dealing with somebody who we need to capture, retain, or apply some force against in the field on a regular basis. Underneath that, it talks about military operations and business functions. What I would tell you within the DoD is this is a growth industry. This has really grown up. It started out as applying to the issue of access to information systems back around the turn of the century. It's hard to believe we can talk about the turn of the century, but we can. But as operations overseas grew, it became more of an operational necessity to be able to identify and track individuals in the battle space. Members of the civilian population, various sorts of malfeasance who might be in that battle space, and we need to track them, tracking prison populations, whatever it may be. And the fact of the matter is that that's a growth industry for the DoD. In the future, we will need these capabilities, regardless of the type of operation that we'll be performing, whether it's disaster relief, whether it's a stability and support operations, whether it's some level of limited conflict. We will need these capabilities in the field, again, to track those who would do us harm, and also to ensure that our own people are protected, that we can recognize and identify key individuals. And part of my job coming on board at BEMA is really to help institutionalize the program. It has grown up as a capability over the last 6 years. Let's see if I can get this to work again. About 6 years, as a rapid reaction capability. It was a quick response to build a database to support ongoing operations. We needed that capability to try to track terrorists mixed in with the population, to try to identify individuals who may have been involved in the production of improvised explosive devices or other methods by which they would do us harm. And it has grown exponentially in terms of the size of the database itself and in terms of how we utilize it and work with our partners in DOJ and DHS to actually expand the envelope of how we can identify people and who we can identify and use that information successfully to support those operations. You can see there are some of the statistics. We use multimodal processing, fingerprint, iris, facial, palm print. We do about 95% of our matches fully automatically without human intervention. And it is a growing database in terms of the number of entries that are in there and our capacity to process them. I mentioned the multimodal. Why is that important? Because in some cases, any individual characteristic that you may process might not be sufficient because of the limitation in the quality of the data that you have. But when you combine the data across those modalities, you have a greater probability of success of identifying that individual. And so we use that multimodal approach. In terms of data sharing, this is a growing area for us, not only in terms of physical location, because as Dan will talk about, we're moving towards co-residence on an FBI facility. but because of logical connections among these various databases. We already have substantial connections to the FBI and the IAFIS database. We have limited connectivity at the moment with DHS, but as Bob will no doubt talk about, that's increasing as well. Where we're going in the future is to that desired end state on the right, where there's more of a common data environment where, because we use common standards and we build the bridges among the various systems, we can actually share data appropriately and ensure that we're not missing someone or a variety of individuals in our process because of the limitations of any one of those single databases. So we're moving to a common environment in terms of being able to share the data. No, it's not a single database. We each have our own databases for specific reasons and to support specific functions, but we will be able to share information broadly and effectively among those databases. So that's my quick overview with regard to the DoD. I'm looking forward to questions. We do operate the authoritative database for the DoD. That's called ABIS. Our current sharing environment with DoD and DHS is limited in terms of throughput. It often involves a lot of manual processing in terms of moving the data from one part of the environment to another so that we can process it appropriately. And where we're going in the future is to make that more automated, more efficient, so that we can ensure that we're sharing that data appropriately while recognizing the sorts of legal and policy constraints that I think all of you understand we have to operate under with regard to the nature of the data we're dealing with and whose biometrics we're dealing with. With that,
thank you, Dr. Killion. Our next presenter is Mr. Robert Mocny. Mr. Mocny leads the U.S. Department of Homeland Security's U.S. VISIT program, which was established to accurately record the entry and exit of travelers to the U.S. by collecting digital fingerprints and photographs. The U.S. VISIT's collection, analysis, and storage of biometric data provide critical information to decision makers throughout federal, state, and local agencies. Mr. Mocny has also been a member of the International Biometric Advisory Council, a group composed of representatives from national governments, international security organizations, and the private sector that advocates global cooperation on issues such as standards and interoperability. Before joining U.S. VISIT, Mr. Mocny served in senior positions related to the U.S. immigration policy and operations at the former Immigration and Naturalization Service, including as the director of the Entry-Exit Project, acting assistant commissioner, and assistant chief inspector. Mr. Mocny has received numerous awards in his career, including U.S. Vice President Al Gore's annual Hammer Award for the Sentry program's innovative use of information technology. Mr. Robert Mocny.
Thank you, Joe. I appreciate that. And before I begin my short remarks, I want to thank AFCEA for the opportunity to speak here today. It's always good to get out and talk about the programs to people who understand what we're trying to achieve and hopefully who can help us in the long run as well. I'm especially pleased to be here with Dr. Killion and with Dan Roberts. Their efforts at creating this interoperable environment, the information sharing, which is frankly unprecedented in my years with the government, are really radically changing the way that we look at how we identify people. And so we'll continue in those efforts, and I just want to thank them for what they've done to date. And of course, I'm pleased to be here with Stephanie Rowe as well, who was in the very early designs of U.S. VISIT with Accenture, and she went on the TSA, did great things over there, and now she's doing great things with her own business, so it's good to be up here with Stephanie. And then I would be remiss if I didn't mention the audience, the people here, the companies that are represented. Our success at U.S. VISIT are due in large part to the efforts of many people in this room. That will continue to be the case. We will always partner with industry. You guys have some of the best ideas out there. We don't. And so we're always going to look to industry. That's why I appreciate conferences such as this to be able to get the word out, kind of talk about the programs, get your questions, and involve you in the process. I mean, just one quick story is that the kind of ubiquitous fingerprint devices that we see out there now didn't exist when we first started this program. And we went to industry. We said we needed something 6 by 6 by 6. It has to look a little bit different, has to be a little bit faster. In about 8 months, we had a brand new device out there. That device is all over the globe now, being used by just about everybody. Those are the kinds of innovation that we're going to be looking for now and in the future. What I wanted to spend my 10 minutes on or so is to talk about kind of the positive effects of interoperability. I mean, if we didn't have interoperability before, we were obviously missing something, because you'll hear a couple of the terrific kind of examples of what we've seen to date. If we weren't sharing information before, we were missing a lot. And so I just want to talk about some of those areas here. Now, I was originally an inspector with the INS. I started out in San Francisco in 1989. We would interview people coming into the ports of entry. We would talk to them, and at some point, we would have to make a decision, should we let this person in or not? I bet I let in the wrong people from time to time, because I didn't have the full complement of information. And so much of our information was based on biographics, names and dates of birth, passport numbers. That's not to say that biographic alone isn't very helpful. That's not to say that the men and women of CBP, of Customs Border Protection, don't do a terrific job and know their business. But if that person doesn't have that last piece of information to help him or her make a decision, then you're making an incorrect decision. Let's face it, the job of Customs, the job of consular officers is to basically say, who am I dealing with? Who are you? And do you have the right to have that benefit? A visa, entry into the U.S., citizenship, lawful permanent status. So these decision makers are wrestling with this idea of who are you, why are you coming here, and should I grant you this benefit? And if we can collectively share that information so that decision maker can make more informed decisions, then I think we've done our job. And frankly, that's our responsibility. I would posit that it's Tom and Dan and Bob's responsibility.
Excuse me.
To scare the heck out of us.
Sorry.
Now you're awake. All right.
That's all for you.
That it's our obligation to grow our databases, to make sure they're operating so that the police officer, the warfighter, the DHS decision maker can make the most informed decision. So after we implemented the whole idea of biometrics at State Department and with State Department with their BioVisa program, and at the ports of entry with CBP, the two-print system alone was identifying people that we may have missed. On the biometric alone, we were identifying individuals who were using fraudulent passports, false identities, trying to game the system. And we frankly didn't know it was going to work. I mean, kudos to Secretary Ridge for kind of pushing us off that cliff. We didn't crash and burn like we thought we might. It actually worked. Now, was it perfect? No. Did it have its limitations, 2-print? Yes, it does. And Secretary Chertoff says, we're going to push you off another cliff and you go over to 10-print. And that was scaring people out there, too. Oh, my gosh, you can take... So will 10 prints take 8 times longer than 2 prints alone? Well, no, in fact, it's faster based on the requirements that we gave to you, and it's identifying individuals so that we can identify people with latent prints and make that a much easier process than it was with the 2-digit process here. So this kind of growing program of introducing biometrics to some new environments, not a police officer booking somebody, we know that, and even taking someone into custody on the DoD. The idea of using biometrics for tourists, not terrorists, is something that was a little bit foreign to people when we first started this, and so we had to demonstrate the positive effects of this. But again, there was information missing. In 2006, Dan's office and US VISIT partnered together to create the Interoperability program. Basically, the FBI now sends us thousands of prints a day. We make more informed decisions because we're letting people with wants and warrants, known and suspected terrorists, sexual predators, and the such are now being identified every single day because of the interoperability that we have with the FBI. Completely much more informed decision-making process from CBP. In fact, and this is one where I get a little excited here, rapid response in Detroit. So prior to rapid response in Detroit, a prototype or a pilot that we will now expand to other locations, we had people coming into the country with criminal history that made them ineligible to come to the country. But they came to the country because we didn't know about it. We can now search the FBI's criminal master file, 65-some million prints in under 15 seconds. That is a tremendous, tremendous step forward in this idea of using and leveraging both information sharing and the technical interoperability between the two systems. I think just some numbers here. As of February 17th, a total of 29,262 transactions have been sent to IAFIS with 261 matches. 96% of the transactions have been returned within that 15-second inspection time. So a tremendous step forward that we're now deeming it a success in Detroit. We'll be rolling it out to the other locations. Going the other way, when a police officer books someone into an ever-increasing number of county jails, that police officer is oftentimes faced with someone, guess what, lying about who they really are. There's no identification on them. They say, I've been living here for many years. I'm a green card holder or I'm a citizen, when in fact they're not. And now through the Secure Communities program that ICE manages, we can tell that police officer who is really in front of them. And the fact that they have been deported 2 or 3 times before, and the fact that we don't want to put a detainer on that individual and that we want to end up deporting that individual. Again, just some numbers very quickly. From October 2008 through the end of January 2011, 62,000 convicted criminal aliens have been removed because of the Secure Communities program. And that 62,000 that just may not have been encountered before, but have been encountered by more and more, as they use the term, boots on the ground, eyes on the street, cops on the street, identifying people, booking them for some other crime, shoplifting, drunk driving, whatever it might be, and then determining through the Secure Communities process, through interoperability with the US VISIT ident system and with SIEGES, that we're able to inform these officers. Dr. Killion mentioned the DoD. We're working with them on a very similar kind of operation, so we'll be able to get information from the war fighters, information that will, again, inform our decision makers who was in front of them and who is potentially not eligible for that particular benefit. That doesn't mean we're not sharing information right now, and every day, every week, every month, we get data, we get prints from the DoD. We load them into the system. We hit them on a regular basis. Much of the IED, improvised explosive device, latent prints are then sent over to us, and we have made several identifications based on that. So kind of interoperability on the cheap. We're getting the data there, FTP or Buffalo Drive, however we do it, CD. Within about a year's time frame, we believe we're going to have the full connectivity that we have with the FBI. And with an increasing number of international partners as well. We recently had a case working with the UK, Australia, and Canada, able to identify an Australian citizen who was convicted of rape in Australia, living in the UK under an assumed name, getting asylum benefits. He's now back in Australia serving 7 years' time for that rape. That would not have happened had we not had interoperable systems and this willingness to share data, not just amongst the US government, but also internationally. Interpol, a real quick story here. It's an old story, but it's a good story. So this Costa Rican citizen goes into the embassy in San Jose, applies for a visa, goes through the 2-print process at the time, so that's 2004. There's no hit. He gets the visa. He goes home, he's packing his bags. We get some new information from Interpol. He's not Costa Rican. He's a Bulgarian national who had absconded with $13 million from Bulgaria 10 years prior. So the State Department called him back in under ruse, canceled the visa. Don't know exactly what happened to him after there, whether he was extradited back to Bulgaria or not. But again, the idea that you've got these identities, you've got this ability now to manage those identities, good and bad. And through information sharing protocols, we can identify individuals and prevent their entry into the U.S. So it works, information sharing works. I'm a big believer in it. It makes our nation safer, makes our officers more confident in their decision-making ability. Just a quick couple of other things. As we said, we want to make sure you have the latest information. Yes, we have fingerprints, but we too are moving to the iris realm, facial recognition, so we'll always be looking at new modalities. The next big issue for US Visit is 1.0. So it's somewhat of a misnomer to say we have a US Visit system. We have a conglomeration of systems. And so we've learned from that. We know what we want, and right now we can't have what we want. And so we'll be coming out to industry over the course of this year and next with some RFIs, some RFPs, some industry days to basically help us solve the problem. Okay, knowing we've gotten ourselves into what we've gotten ourselves into. We're using the system as we know it today, and we're doing 5 million searches in sub 6 seconds. We need 500 million searches in sub 6 seconds. All right, not just fingerprint, but iris and facial recognition and other modalities. So we will again be out there working with you. Appreciate letting me speak this afternoon, and appreciate the opportunity. Look forward to your questions. Thank you very much.
Good, Dan.
Thank you, Mr. Mocny. Our next speaker is Mr. Dan Roberts from the FBI. In April 2009, FBI Director Robert Mueller named Mr. Roberts to his current position as the FBI Assistant Director in charge of FBI's Criminal Justice Information Services Division, or CJIS. The CJIS mission is to equip law enforcement, national security, and the FBI's intelligence community partners with the criminal justice information that they need to protect the United States while preserving civil liberties. CJIS is the largest division in the FBI, and its programs include the National Crime Information Center, Uniform Crime Reporting, the Integrated Automated Fingerprint Identification System, the National Incident-Based Reporting System, and the new Interagency Biometrics Center of Excellence. Prior to his current position, Mr. Roberts served the FBI as the Deputy Assistant Director of the FBI's Criminal Investigation Division. He was a Special Assistant in the Office of the Deputy Director of the FBI and served for 2.5 years as the Special Agent in charge of FBI's Detroit Field Office, where he provided leadership over an FBI investigative and intelligence operations in the entire state of Michigan. In addition, Mr. Roberts' career in the FBI has included additional assignments as a primary SWAT team leader, a firearms instructor, the director of the FBI Chicago Division's Joint Task Force on Gangs, and as the Assistant Special Agent in charge of the 2002 Winter Olympic Games in Utah. Mr. Dan Roberts.
Thank you, Joe. I appreciate the warm reception here. It's always interesting to sit there and listen to your resume being read, because really, when you come to think of it, the only person who cares is your mother. So on behalf of my 81-year-old mother who lives up in Michigan, thank you for reading my resume. What I'd like to do, Tom and Bob have done a really good job at outlining today the current state of our interoperability efforts. What I'd like to do is focus on where we want to go in the future. Maybe tell you a little bit about where the FBI is today, and then go into the future where we might be headed with biometric modalities. Let me start by just offering you a quick success story that I hope you'll find interesting, and why biometrics is so important. You can see some of the things that are up on my slide here about why it's important for us to take a look at the biometric modalities, and certainly all of those things that are listed are important to us as investigators and trying to put crimes together and try to connect the dots, as they say. It's all very important information, but let me drive it home to you with a live example. Last spring, we detailed a very large contingent of agents over to Afghanistan. We were asked to come in by the DoD and fingerprint all of the prisoners that are currently lodged in Afghanistan prisons. These are all locally run prisons in Afghanistan. The DoD allowed us entry, and we went in and we did something like 9,000 collections of prisoners at 3 different institutions in Afghanistan. It was an interesting collection. It was clearly putting our people in a war zone to collect these biometrics, which we really don't do very often. But we took fingerprints, iris scan, and photographs, and some other things, and DNA swabs, and came back to the United States, started running those fingerprints through IAFIS. Excuse me, I'm fighting a cold, as you all can tell. And ended up, because of that collection, we identified 11 of those prisoners that were linked to improvised explosive devices that had exploded in theater. So it was a fantastic biometrics collection capability and effort. One of the pieces of equipment, and Bob briefly mentioned his, that's being used around the world. One of the things that we're always looking to do is to upgrade ours. We have what we call our quick capture platform that our agents that are overseas deploy with. It's relatively compact, fits into a backpack with a satellite capability to get it back to our offices in West Virginia. The problem is it's heavy. You know, when you're talking about 60 pounds of lugging all of that stuff around, and our operators that are in a war zone don't really care about carrying 60 pounds worth of fingerprint capture equipment when they could be carrying more ammunition or more guns. So it's difficult sell to get them on. We're always looking for lighter, better, faster collection devices out there. And I will leave you with that thought as we move on here. As Joe mentioned in the introduction, the CJIS division is the largest FBI division in the country. Nobody realizes that, I don't think. And we are in West Virginia, located south of Morgantown in West Virginia, for those of you that have been out there. We have over 2,500 employees who are on site there, a 1,000-acre campus. We would like to thank the late Senator Byrd for getting us out there. He provided all of the funding for that in the early 1990s, and we've been out there ever since, and it's been a great experiment for the FBI to move away from the DC and put those folks out there. When we started IAFIS, our fingerprint database, it was meant to handle 62,500 at most prints a day, transactions a day. Those are 10-print fingerprint cards. We average now around 200,000 a day. And so, as you can see, our systems need to be upgraded, and we are upgrading that, and I'll talk about that in just a minute. But it's amazing how it's grown over the years, the capacities. We have over 65 now, closer to 70 million individuals represented in the IAFIS database. Those individuals are criminals. These are all bad guys. There are nothing but bad guys in our systems. We don't maintain on anybody else but that. And the current system was developed in the 1990s, and so it was in need of upgrade, which we are currently doing through our program called Next Generation Identification, or NGI. Later this month, we are rolling out a very important increment of NGI. As some of you in the audience know very well, we're going to improve the accuracy, improve the speed of the current fingerprint capability greatly, and that will happen on the 25th of this month, God willing. After that, we're going to be moving into, and we've touched on some of these modalities already here, but we're going to be moving into some of the other areas that we don't collect and do enough with currently. And that, of course, is palm prints, latents, iris, and facial. Now, those modalities were identified to us by the law enforcement community. We service 18,000 law enforcement agencies across this country. We asked them, what is it that you'd like us to focus on? What is the area that you would like us to move towards? We have what we call an advisory policy board, or an APB board, that many of the members here sit on, and they tell us what they are looking for. These are 35, roughly, chiefs of police, sheriffs, and others in the law enforcement community who are looking for better ways to make those dots, make those connections via the dots. And that's why we picked the facial, the iris, and the palm. We didn't do that as in a vacuum at the FBI. One of the challenges, and Tom briefly mentioned our new center here, so I'll talk about that in a second, but one of the challenges that we face is that beyond facial, beyond iris, fingerprints, palm prints, there are some other neat biometric modalities out there that the researchers are working on in various academic institutions across the country. The challenge for me, where I sit, is trying to figure out which ones are we going to actually look at, which one's going to help us put the bad guy in jail at the end of the day. There's some really cool stuff they're looking at. Gait technology, the way somebody walks or runs. Is that going to help a cop on the street put somebody in jail? I don't know, maybe. Doubtful, from where I sit, doubtful, but maybe we want to look at that. scent technology, basically trying to replicate a dog's nose. And each person has an individual scent, some better than others, I guess. But we're trying to replicate or find ways to do that. You know, is that a modality? Is that a biometric modality that we want to look at in the future? So one of the ways that we thought we would do this is work with all of our partners, all of those people sitting at this table, and put it all in one complex rather than trying to deal over the phone or deal on the internet and figure out which way we want to go. And that's why the Biometric Technology Center was developed and is currently being built in West Virginia, right on the same property as our other CJIS holdings. It's a proud partnership with DoD. We are really looking forward to the day when we can take possession of that building. Construction is going on as we speak. If anybody would like to come out sometime and see our campus, we're certainly always welcome there. It is a wonderful environment, and believe me, after 24 years of working in major cities like DC and Chicago and Detroit, it's nice to have a 9-minute commute to work every day as opposed to a 90-minute commute each way. So this will house all of our biometrics research efforts in the future. We hope to have it not only with DoD and DHS, but we also hope to have a great academic partnership, which we currently have with some institutions across this country, and we'd like to get them right on site as well. Scheduled opening of that, as I say, we are currently building it. The hole is in the ground, and it's building up, and it should be in it by fall of 2013 with all of us working together there, trying to figure out where we want to go in the future with what modality we want to go to. So that's where we are. We've laid out the interoperability piece for you, and now we laid out where we want the future is. I look forward to the questions that are burning in your mind, because as somebody hit on earlier, I am not a technologist. I'm not a techie like all of you folks maybe are in the audience here. I am an agent by training, which means I'm a knuckle dragger, and I help put bad guys in jail. But from what I'm told, I employ a lot of technologists, and they say the technology is the easy part. The hard part is getting through all of the policy issues, and you can hear some of the challenges that we face here in the interoperability and dealing with the policy and dealing with the perspectives just to make sure that we're doing the right thing for this country, and it's getting better every day thanks to the leadership of these folks that are sitting at the table. So with that, I look forward to taking your questions later on, and thank you for inviting me today.
Thank you very much, Dan. Our final presentation will be made by Ms. Stephanie Rowe, who is the founder and CEO of Rowe-NEXT LLC, which is a consulting company providing strategic execution and implementation services to organizations seeking to rapidly and sustainably transform their products, services, and our operations. Prior to founding Next, Ms. Rowe was recruited by TSA Administrator Kip Hawley to bring private sector practices, concepts, and oversight to TSA programs, where she served as Executive Director of Security Evolution. In that role at TSA, Ms. Rowe managed the complete re-engineering of the passenger screening process, which clears 2.2 million people per day through 450 airports. She deployed next-generation security technologies, implemented checkpoint communications infrastructure, introduced new threat awareness techniques, and culturally transformed all TSA security operations. In addition, Ms. Rowe's tenure at TSA included assignments as the Assistant Administrator for Transportation Threat Assessment and Credentialing, and Director of numerous programs to include the Secure Flight Program, the Transportation Worker Identification Credential Program, the Registered Travel Program, and the Hazardous Material Endorsement Program. Ms. Rowe's extensive accomplishments include the TSA Leadership Award for Superior Performance, the DHS Secretary's Team Excellence Award for Secure Flight, the DHS Secretary's Team Excellence Award for TWIC, and the TSA Security Intelligence Award for TTAC Vetting Operations. Ms. Stephanie Rowe.
Thank you so much. I'm thrilled to be here. Thank you, Joe. I appreciate the introduction. Like you said, it's interesting to have your resume read back to you. I'm also excited to be here with Tom, Bob, and Dan. And I'm going to talk a little bit first about my time as the AA for TTAC. Happy to talk about the role that I did on the broader airport evolution program, but I think that given the identity management topic of today, I'll talk about my time spent as the AA for TTAC, which is Transportation Threat Assessment and Credentialing. And in that role, I was responsible for all identity management programs for TSA. And right now, I want to talk a little bit about where TTAC is going. They have a sources sought notice on the street. They also have a procurement coming up for a program called TIM, which is TTAC Infrastructure Modernization. And they're taking the operation, the TTAC operation, from a program-centric operating model to a person-centric vetting operating model. And I want to take a step back for a second and talk about why that is. I think it's important to note that back in when TSA was created in November of 2001, the Congress didn't sit back and say, hey, TTAC needs to have a robust identity management, vetting, and credentialing capability. What they said was, oh, wow, today we had better vet hazmat drivers because we want to make sure that to get a hazmat endorsement here, we better make sure there aren't terrorists driving that. So here's, I think it was $5 million. $5 million to go vet those drivers. Then comes along TWIC, Registered Traveler. So those programs were stood up and funded independently. They weren't part of a larger vision that was identity management and a person-centric view of the world. So, click the clock forward 9 or 10 years, and what grew out of that was a very siloed system, not only with the systems being siloed, as I mentioned, but also with specific and different regulations. So there's a hazmat rule. There's a secure flight rule. There's a TWIC rule. And so as you move forward, not only then do you have to consider how do you redesign and deploy the new systems, you also have to think about the regulations and the policy decisions that went along with that. And then also to add another layer of complexity to it, you have within TTAC, you have fee-funded programs. So you get, for example, TSA got startup money for both TWIC and hazmat, among others. And then once those programs got stood up, they then were responsible for operating themselves based on the fee revenue that was generated. Different than the secure flight program, which is a purely appropriated program. And so as TTAC moves forward and thinks about how does it need to deploy these systems, it has to think about, TWIC money can only be spent on TWIC, or money that's spent on TWIC can only be related to programs, systems, operations that support the TWIC program. So it adds a layer of complexity for TTAC as they go forward in thinking about how they're going to modernize. So I just wanted to touch for a second on the past, because I think it's important as we think about where does TSA want to go in the future and what are the challenges that they're going to face as they move forward. So one of my favorite expressions I learned while I was in government was, there's nothing as temporary, or there's nothing as permanent as a temporary government solution. And so I chuckled to myself because I think about TTAC. It was stood up, as I had mentioned, out of, I called it spit and chicken wire and $2 million for this. And there was a time when I was there, I believe, and hopefully I'm going to get this number right. Mr. Greg Wellen, my successor, will correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe that TTAC has about 21 million resident right now that they vet every day. When I was there, it was about 8 million. And I remember them saying, hey, let's do commercial driver's license holder. There's 13 million of those. It's like, how am I going to take a system that processes 8 million, add 13 to it, and expect a really good result? So back in 2006, we started talking about the future and where TSA really needed to go and to really create a state-of-the-art, person-centric vetting and credentialing capability. And so what's exciting today, and I'm thrilled to be here and talk about it, is they actually have the money and they are moving forward and they're getting the strategies, visions, requirements, and they're starting the design of that system. In terms of interoperability, and Bob touched on this as well, it's really interesting to think about all of the challenges. And while technology is difficult, in my background, I used to be a computer programmer, years ago. What I really learned while I was at my time in government was how challenging the legal, the political, and the social issues are around security. I mean, just again, I work for TSA. I mean, people are like, "Are you really going to leave your, your corporate job to go and take a pay cut and to go work for TSA of all places?" And And I absolutely loved my time there. I've never met a group of people that had a stronger sense of mission. And you can't, and I know you all know this, but you can't underestimate the political and the social issues around security and specifically identity management. So just because we have the technology does not mean that we can do it because it's not palatable. And I think security is a very, it's a right versus right discussion. We have a right to be secure and we have a right to our privacy. And so those are just woven all the way through just about everything TTAC does, especially because for the most part, TTAC is dealing with US citizens, and they're citizens whose jobs happen to be in a transportation mode. So if you're going to deny a truck driver their hazmat or access to a port, you're denying their right to have a job, their right to earn and to earn money to feed their families and pay their mortgages. And that we have to keep that in the back of our minds as we go forward and think about the programs that we institute and how we go about doing that. Because if we can't do that expeditiously, as an example, it really matters to the folks. So again, I just wanted to bring focus to that it really is that it is American citizens in large part that TSA deals with. And one other point I want to make is on interoperability and the challenges there. So when we think about all the partnerships and the great things that Bob and the other folks have talked about today, from a technical perspective, I want to say easy, but it's easier to build an interface. It's harder for TSA to say, hey, you know what, CBP? I'm going to let you run the router for secure flight. Because when that router goes down and the secure flight program goes down, guess whose name is on the front page of the paper? Because the shade of gray that says CBP is running the router is irrelevant. And so as we think about interoperability and as we think about leveraging capabilities from other places, those agencies or those owners that own those programs are the ones that are accountable. So even if you're talking about an example relevant right here would be between TTAC and US VISIT, is TTAC going to, I believe that they are, going to give their biometrics and let US VISIT maintain those? So that's a piece of, and another example where a piece of that agency's mission is given to somebody else. And they're going to entrust that partner to really deliver and truly be a partner that mission space. And so as we talk about interoperability, it's not only the technology, it is how do you reconcile the regulations? How do you consider all the fee rules and challenges and authorities there? And it's also the trust among the other agencies that they really are going to deliver on that mission. So I'm going to leave it there because I know we're running out of time, and I'm happy to take any other questions.
Thank you very much, Stephanie. Now we'll open it up to questions from the audience. If you have any, please step forward to one of the microphones and feel free to ask away. I'll start off with one while you're thinking about that. To any of the panelists, what would be the ultimate goals of creating a biometric data sharing environment between DHS, DoD, and DOJ?
I'm going to take that first, Bob.
I'll be happy to start and fill in the blanks. I think, and we haven't, we're not there yet. We hope to be, as I said, by the end of the year, the other piece of the triad, hope to DoD. But I think what we all realize is that, first of all, we have the large repositories of biometric data, at least fingerprint data, that are out there. That in this growing use of biometrics, other departments and agencies are going to want to utilize those as well when they see the benefits of that. So what I believe we're trying to build is that repository that can be used as appropriate with the other agencies and departments that are looking to biometric identities without building a fourth and a fifth and a sixth system out there. These are tough economic times. They're not going to get that much better anytime real soon. And so as we move forward, I think the idea is to take the information that we have grown to date, make that as available with all the due diligence to privacy and everything else that you have to consider, but make that available. All I know is that with interoperability with the FBI, that the DHS is that much more proficient at what it does, and that the information we get from the DoD, we're that much more informed and proficient at what we do every single day. So building that triad will build the kind of that which doesn't exist today, but that system, which we can, as I said, share amongst each other, but then make that information available to those that would choose to employ biometrics in their operations. That's one aspect of it. Tom?
And I would add, from the DoD's perspective, the battlefield is not a nice, neat place, even localized on the Earth anymore. There's a lot of, obviously, trafficking across the globe. There are people who are moving throughout that globe. And there are certainly cases of people who've involved themselves in the wrong kinds of activities in theater and then popped up elsewhere on the globe, perhaps trying to come across a border. And if we weren't sharing this data and that were to happen and they were to engage in activities here domestically, we would certainly hear about it in the press, I can imagine. But because we can share that information and use it effectively, it will help to protect the homeland against such incidents. So that's a key part of establishing that interoperability and that sharing across our community.
I guess the only thing that I will add there, and this gets into the discussion about the policy versus the technology. You know, we would all love to see it where we can just pull it all up on our screen and take a look at everything that Bob's got or everything that Tom's got right there, right? But here's the deal. I mean, my database, which is very rich with 70 million bad guys, we don't own those records. They're owned by the states. They're owned by the 18,000 law enforcement agencies across this country. They submit them to us. They allow us to use them. We hold them, and then we distribute them per their agreements with each of the states that we have. Every state has a different law governing what records can be distributed and what they can be used for, whether it's a civil purpose or a law enforcement purpose. And so the challenge is walking that line and making sure that we're not violating any of the states' rights in addition to our own federal rights or our own federal laws here that we have. So I just throw that out as, you know, that is a cautionary note there.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I would just like to add one point, and that is, you know, TSA, the data that these folks have actually operationalizes at TSA, right? Because if you're a hazmat or a TWIC card holder, you know, how TSA can use that data is to make better risk management decisions. Because right now you have, you know, criminal history records checks, but this starts to get to, you know, to a broader classification. It starts to have terrorism play a slightly broader role than it has before, but it allows TSA more data so that it can make better decisions overall.
Down here.
Yeah, hi, Cal Biesecker here with Defense Daily. Bob, just start with you. Just can you give us an update here on biometric air exit? It looks like in the FY12 request, it's basically been canned for the time being. And then a question for Tom, just about institutionalizing what's been done the last 6 years. If you could provide some more specifics, some more color on, you know, everything's been going on. I think there are different standards and what have you. Now I think it's time to tighten the ship a little bit, I suppose, is what you're stating. But if you could explain that better. So, Bob, if you could start with you, and then.
Be happy to. So we all have to make decisions in these tight economic times here. Biometric Exit has been tested since 2004 in a variety of locations. We started with 12 airports, 2 seaports. The technology worked just fine. We can take a fingerprint in the middle of the airport. We can beam that back to Washington, D.C. and have a response time where we can make a decision about whether the person should get on the plane or not. So the technology works. We did a couple of the pilots, one in Detroit, one in Atlanta, on process. So would we hold up the boarding pass process or the boarding process? Would we hold up the TSA process? In both cases, we found out that we didn't. So we kind of have all the pilots done, that most of the answers or questions are answered. It's now a bit about applying those solutions to any decision about exit. A decision has not been made about to do it or to not do it. As you can all tell from the President's budget, it's not in the current 12 budget, but it doesn't mean that we're not concerned about it. We have a very robust biographic exit process. We have an office within U.S. Visit that looks at accepts reports every single day, gathers that biographic information, sends it over to ICE. ICE goes and takes the appropriate action. So I think it's somewhat of an unknown that there is not a robust exit process. There is. It just hasn't migrated yet to the biometric side.
And in terms of being clear on the institutionalization, that sounds like a bad word where you wear a white coat with long sleeves and straps in the back. It's really about creating the necessary program structure so that there will be the necessary resources in place. By resources, whether that's computing assets, the people to do the work, the actual programs to support it. So our program manager for biometrics is in the process of developing at least 2 programs of record, we call them. For those who aren't familiar with the DoD acquisition program, it's either the INVI or some other end of the spectrum of the world with regard to the complexity of the process. But to get in the process, you have to have a clear set of requirements. You have to bring those requirements through the Joint Requirements Oversight Council, get those blessed and validated at the highest levels. And then you can move into the phase where you will actually then obtain funding, develop milestones, develop solutions, and get support to deliver a capability in the future. We are now establishing those programs of record to essentially upgrade our current capabilities in the future and establish long-term acquisition strategies and sustainment strategies for those systems. In the one case with regard to the database, it's called Biometrics Enabled Capabilities, BEC, which will be the next evolution of our database program, ABIS, or NG-ABIS, as was mentioned on the slide. The system we have today will transition to BEC. In the other case, we have something called JPI v2, which will be then not next, but next generation of handheld tactical devices that are used in the field to actually collect the data. We have a number of devices today that are being used across the department and with the other agencies. We're evolving to that next generation of systems, and JPI v2 will respond to the needs for those systems. Like Dan was talking about, some of the boxes we have today, a little tough to lug around. You want something that looks like your iPhone but captures all the necessary information. That's where people want to go in the future, because computing allows you to do that. And that's where we need to head in the long run.
Any other questions? I have one more before we end, and that is, since 9/11, the need to share biometric data internationally certainly has come to the forefront. And I'd like to ask the panelists what they've done with their international partners to facilitate that biometric sharing, and also while adhering to standards that are required.
Okay, I'll start off on this one, and actually the whole concept of sharing had nothing to do with 9/11 or terrorism cases. It actually, from the FBI's perspective, started with sharing with countries in Latin America to address the MS-13 gang problem. Mara Salvatrucha 13, which is a El Salvadoran-based gang in Central America that has spread to the United States, recognized it as being a major problem, mostly out on the West Coast in California initially. So we went down and met with our partners in Latin America, started sharing fingerprint data on the arrested individuals in both countries that were known MS-13 gang members. At the end of the day, we identified that there were MS-13 members in 40 different states in the United States, not just in California, growing like a weed. And so we ended up having to open up a number of RICO cases and investigate those gang cases and put a lot of people in jail. But I point that example out as the way that that whole thing got started was really not because of 9/11. It was because of a local crime threat that we needed to address involving a street gang. There are a number of complexities involved in sharing fingerprint data and other biometrics with other countries. You know, we have the whole spectrum. We have we'll go into some countries and they'll say, here's our system. We don't really have a system. You can have whatever you can find. We have other countries that will not allow us anywhere near their records. So it's very much country specific. I will say the efforts that we have with the UK, with Canada, with Australia, and with New Zealand are worth noting because all of us think very much alike in terms of what we want to share. We all have pretty much the same capabilities. Others are more advanced than in certain areas. But we are trying to work through all of the legal and policy concerns to make sure that we are interoperable amongst those. For example, our Canadian partners today, they have direct access to any of the systems out at the CJIS division, just like a Fairfax County Sheriff's Office would. And so it just depends on the country. And I think Bob has some other examples of interoperability in foreign government.
Yeah, so our story kind of goes along the lines of after 9/11, you implemented this new program, and we don't believe that you can run fingerprints on primary and provide the 10-second or so response to not have long lines there. And why would you be fingerprinting people who haven't committed a crime already? So a lot of churning in the 2004 timeframe about why we were doing what we were doing and some of the potential negatives that would occur because of it. Shortly after we began to have the successes that we did, they began to take a second look at that. And they said, well, maybe we can actually implement this. And so kind of fast forward to today where you have all of the partners that Dan just mentioned who have are either or in the process of modifying their border control systems to allow the use of biometrics. Canada's building theirs right now. They'll have it up and running by 2013. Australia just went out with a $65 million bid to build their system. Japan already has theirs. New Zealand will be building theirs shortly after Australia begins their process. So you're seeing this across the globe. I'm probably not telling you all the things you don't know already, but if there's a message out there about some of the growth that Tom talked about, it is that there was this experiment, at least in the immigration border control area, that people were skeptical about before, that has proven to be successful in large part, as I said, a lot of the effort in this room. That is launching an effort that's going to go worldwide. All of South America is moving to this area. The EU is supposed to go live in 2011. So, I mean, if there's an opportunity, if there's a growth industry in these dire economic times, it's going to be the use of biometrics for immigration, border control, and then some after that.
And I would certainly second that. I'll play the role that Dan played earlier in terms of his comment about policy at the end, which is, and of course there's a rub there, which is we have international partners, each of whom wants their data to be used or not used in certain ways. And we have to respect that as good international partners. So we have to go through the hard process of actually negotiating the way in which we can collect and share that information and then share it among ourselves or with other partners in the community. That's a difficult process, but something that we have to do and work closely with the Department of State on.
Any other questions from the audience? Well, if not, I'd like to once again thank our panel for taking out the time out of your busy schedules to be with us here today. A small token of appreciation for your efforts from AFCEA. Once again, thank you very much.